hello, and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to episode 76 of Codename Kids Next Door, Operation Girlfriend. We begin this episode with Lizzie Devine in her room humming the wedding march, which gives us a clue about what event she's preparing for. Lizzie then receives a call from Number 1 who inquires how she's doing, and Lizzie responds that she is looking forward to today. Lizzie also reminds Number 1 about the event starting at 3 o'clock, and Number 1 assures Lizzie that he has every intention of being there. After Number 1 finishes his call with Lizzie, the computer informs Number 1 about a crisis that's occurring, and the computer gives Number 1 the coordinates to this crisis. Looking at his watch, Number 1 figures that he has plenty of time to complete this sudden mission before the event with Lizzie begins, so Number 1 requests the specifics of the mission while his 2x4 technology vehicle enters flight mode. We quickly find out that this crisis is taking place at the First National Kids Candy Bank. Sticky Beard and his candy pirate crew are robbing the bank, and Sticky Beard is particularly interested in the Sweater of Sweetness. Number 1 arrives at the First National Kids Candy Bank just when Sticky Beard is preparing to leave with the Sweater of Sweetness. Number 1 takes the Sweater of Sweetness from Sticky Beard, so Sticky Beard and his candy pirate crew use the sweet revenge to chase after Number 1. After an extended chase sequence, Number 1 manages to defeat Sticky Beard and his candy pirate crew by passing by various bridges, which causes the sweet revenge to break apart. After Number 1 has defeated Sticky Beard and his candy pirate crew, Number 65.3 arrives and congratulates Number 1 for a job well done. Number 65.3 assures Number 1 that he will return the Sweater of Sweetness to the First National Kids Candy Bank, but he also acts rather nervous, saying that he can't stay for very long. Before he leaves, Number 65.3 requests that Number 1 tell Lizzie that he, Number 65.3, says hi. This causes Number 1 to panic because he remembers that he needs to make it to the event that he agreed to go to with Lizzie. So Number 1 rushes off to a church, and inside he finds Lizzie upset. Lizzie questions how could Number 1 leave her at the altar of her older sister's wedding. Number 1 tries to explain the recent mission that occurred, but Lizzie interrupts by making several rhetorical guesses about what the mission is about. One of these rhetorical guesses is actually a mission that did happen in the past. According to Number 1, he says this mission happened a week ago, I believe. Lizzie says, though, that's not the point. She says that the point is she looked like a dateless loser, in her words, at her older sister's wedding. Number 1 tries to assure Lizzie that he will make a point to be on time for her brother's wedding, but Lizzie responds that her brother is 4 years old. Suddenly, the computer informs Number 1 of an emergency, so Number 1 assures Lizzie that he will return quickly. Lizzie mentions that the wedding reception is in an hour, I believe, and Number 1 assures Lizzie once again that he will make it back in time. He figures that this emergency won't take him very far. The next scene shows us the Kids Next Door Moonbase headquarters, and Number 1 is now on the moonbase. He has several guesses for what this emergency is about, but the computer reveals to Number 1 that this emergency is about Meatball Sandwich Day. Number 1 is baffled to hear this, and he questions why would the computer send him up to the moon base over a meatball sandwich. The computer responds that Number 1 requested reminders about future meatball sandwich days because he missed one in the past. Number 1 is about to argue with the computer some more, but he doesn't get the chance to do so because Number 362 arrives, and she compliments Number 1 for the suit that he's wearing right now. Number 1 formally greets number 362, but number 362 assures number 1 that there's no need for formalities, and she invites number 1 to join her for some meatball sandwiches. Number 1 responds that he needs to return to the wedding reception, but number 362 playfully says that she'll make it an order. Number 1 decides that he can spare a little time for a meatball sandwich before he returns to the wedding reception. But number 362 whispers to number 1 that there's something important she needs to tell him, but they also can't let anyone else become suspicious about what they're talking about. So she encourages number 1 to pretend that they're talking about something else, or to act like they're talking about something else, like Yipper, for example. So while they're whispering, number 362 tells number 1 about the Splinter Cell, a group of kids next door operatives that have an extremist mindset. They wish to eliminate all adults, regardless of whether they're good, bad, or morally ambiguous. Number 1 responds that he thought the Splinter Cell was just a cover story for the kids next door scientists so that they could watch Dr. Timespace in the Continuums, which we saw in the segment Operation Amish. And number 1 also acts dismissive towards Dr. Timespace in the Continuums. He calls it a lame show, or something along those lines at least. Number 362 clarifies for number 1 that she's not talking about that cover story. She's talking about the actual Splinter Cell in the organization, which she says does exist. And she also makes a point to say that she thinks that Dr. Timespace in the Continuums is awesome. But in any case, number 362 clarifies for number 1 that yes, the Splinter Cell does indeed exist. And she also says that the Splinter Cell is interested in number 1. She figures that the Splinter Cell wants number 1 to join their cause. And she also inquires number 1 about if he was approached by any other operatives recently. Number 1 says he doesn't think so at first, but then he remembers that number 65.3 was acting nervous before he left to supposedly return the sweater of sweetness to the First National Kids Candy Bank. Number 362 responds that she actually finished a phone call with the First National Kids Candy Bank not too long ago, and she says that they told her that they never got the sweater of sweetness back. Number 1 and number 362 now both suspect that maybe number 65.3 is a member of the Splinter Cell. Number 362 also warns number 1 that he has to be careful. Any other operatives in the organization could be a member of the Splinter Cell, and any operative in the cafeteria right now could be a member of the Splinter Cell for all they know. Number 362 continues her warning by saying that she has a feeling that the Splinter Cell won't give number 1 a warm reception, in her words, if they find out that he has no interest in joining their cause. Hearing the word reception causes number 1 to panic and remember that he needs to make it back to the wedding reception. So number 1 hurries back to the wedding reception, and Lizzie comments that the wedding reception is almost over, and she also mentions that the meal that she saved for number 1 has become cold, but she figures that a waiter could probably reheat the meal for number 1. Number 1, though, admits that he's not very hungry right now. Lizzie is baffled to hear this, but then she notices some tomato sauce on number 1's suit. Number 1 admits that he had a meatball sandwich before he arrived at the wedding reception, and Lizzie is baffled to hear that number 1 ate before the wedding reception, and she also goes on a rant about how meatball sandwiches apparently go to number 1's butt. Number 1, though, stops Lizzie's rant by taking her out to the dance floor and requesting that she listen to him while he apologizes. Lizzie does agree to hear number 1 out. So number 1 dances with Lizzie, and he apologizes for being very busy with the Kids Next Door organization. He acknowledges he is dedicated to the organization's cause, and he believes that he was put on Earth to fight adult tyranny, but he does care about Lizzie, he assures her. And he also admits to Lizzie that he may not say something very often, if at all, but there is something he does want to say to Lizzie right now. But number 1 is interrupted when the computer warns him that number 65.3, number 1 is interrupted when the computer warns him that number 65.3 is apparently right behind him. So using a dance move, number 1 gets Lizzie out of the way, and then he proceeds to attack who he believes is number 65.3. But he quickly finds out that he's not actually attacking number 65.3. Yes, the individual that the computer claimed to be number 65.3 is actually Lizzie's grandma, who just wanted to dance with Lizzie. Number 1 is about to explain why the confusion happened to Lizzie, but the computer interrupts him again by saying that he's getting a call from number 362. So number 362 tells number 1 that she's actually using a radar to track number 65.3, and he's out on the road. Number 1 is confused about this because the computer told him that number 65.3 was at the wedding reception. Number 362 just figures that the computer must have made a mistake, but she says that she's about to arrive at the wedding reception and she wants number 1 to make sure he has everything he needs before they leave. Number 1 tries to explain to number 362 that he can't leave the wedding reception, but number 362 responds that this is important. Number 65.3 could be their only lead to the Splinter Cell, and she orders number 1 to be prepared to leave when she arrives. So number 362 arrives in her 2x4 technology vehicle, and number 1 begrudgingly enters the vehicle to join number 362. Lizzie goes to find number 1 to tell him that the bouquet is about to be thrown, but then she sees number 1 and number 362 leaving in the 2x4 technology vehicle, and then Lizzie is knocked out by the bouquet. Apparently it's cast iron. So Lizzie regains consciousness, and she says that she had a strange dream about number 1 leaving the wedding with some other girl. Lizzie's older sister clarifies that that actually did happen. That was not a dream. Lizzie doesn't believe her older sister at first, but the camera guy actually clarifies he has it on camera, and he even has number 1 beating up Lizzie's grandma on the camera. Or yes, the camera guy recorded number 1 beating up Lizzie's grandma. Lizzie is furious about this and storms off to give number 1 a piece of her mind. So yes, the next scene shows number 1 and number 362 are still chasing after number 65.3. According to the radar, number 65.3 is heading for the airport, and number 1 is confused about this. Number 1 is confused about this because he points out that number 65.3 would know that the kids next door vehicles would be much faster than an airplane. Number 362, though, reasons that number 65.3 would know that kids next door related flight patterns are monitored by the global command, or that, yes, the global command can track down any kids next door related flight patterns. So they figure that the airplane is probably done to avoid being tracked by global command. And they figure that maybe he's heading to the Splinter Cell's headquarters. So elsewhere, we see Lizzie arrive at the Sector V treehouse, figuring that number 1 will be there, but the computer responds to Lizzie that number 1 is away on a mission, but Lizzie can stay and wait for him to return. Lizzie, though, doesn't believe the computer. She says that she saw number 1 with another girl, but then the computer begins to trap Lizzie within the Sector V treehouse. Back at the airport, yes, we then head to the airport where we see number 1 and number 362 have arrived, and they're trying to find number 65.3. But while they're trying to find number 65.3, number 1's communicator activates, and Lizzie contacts number 1 to question why he had Lizzie trapped within the Sector V treehouse. Number 1, though, doesn't understand what Lizzie's talking about, or he doesn't know what Lizzie's talking about, but he hears Lizzie acting nervous on the other line, so he fears that something bad is happening to Lizzie, and he's planning to leave. Number 362, though, insists that number 1 needs to hurry, and yes, number 362 urges number 1 to hurry. They need to catch number 65.3 before he leaves. Number 1, though, tries to explain to number 362 that sounds like Lizzie is in danger and he needs to help Lizzie. Number 362, though, insists that there's no time. Number 65.3 could be their only lead to the Splinter Cell, but number 1 still insists he needs to help Lizzie. Number 362, though, tries to stop number 1 again, saying that she's giving him a direct order and that he better have his priorities straight, in her words. Number 1 responds, he does have his priorities straight. That's what number 1 responds with, and he rushes off. Number 362 does have a sad look on her face while number 1 is leaving. Number 1 arrives at the Sector V treehouse, and he finds that Lizzie is trapped within an energy barrier, and he questions what's going on, while Lizzie thinks that number 1 is in on this. The computer, though, then reveals to number 1 that the computer, number 1 tries to free Lizzie, but the computer stops number 1, and the computer claims that Lizzie is not the one for number 1, or the computer says something along those lines at least. And number 1, though, number 1 figures that the Splinter Cell must be behind why the computer is acting this way, but the computer claims that the computer is acting of its own accord. The computer insists that it's acting of its own free will, and the computer believes that the computer, is the one for number 1, commenting about how they are both dedicated to the Kids Next Door organization, and the computer also brings up other things that they share in common, like Yipper shows, and neither of them have hair. Number 1 thinks that this must be some practical joke that's being played on him, and that number 2 is probably recording what's going on right now. But the computer responds that it's not made for telling jokes. And number 1, though, says that if this isn't a joke, then this is just ridiculous. Things would not work out because number 1 is human and the computer is, well, a computer. But the computer doesn't accept this answer and continues to try and prevent number 1 from escaping. Yes, the computer, number 1 does manage to free Lizzie, though. Number 1 manages to free Lizzie and tries to escape with Lizzie, but the computer tries its best to prevent number 1 and Lizzie from escaping. So eventually, though, despite the computer's best efforts, though, number 1 and Lizzie do manage to escape the Sector V treehouse, but unfortunately, they're not out of the woods yet. The computer actually hijacks the Sector V treehouse, and the Sector V treehouse and the tree itself actually emerge from the Uno home and begins to chase after Yes, the computer has taken over the Sector V treehouse and tree and is using the Sector V treehouse and tree to chase after number 1 and Lizzie. So number 1 and Lizzie do try to make a run for it, but eventually they reach a cliff. They reach a cliff with a body of water below, and there's a lighthouse nearby. And the computer controlling the Sector V treehouse manages to corner number 1 and Lizzie at this cliff. And the computer repeats that it believes it's the one for number 1. But number 1 repeats that it wouldn't work out because he's human and the computer is a computer. But the computer insists that that won't be an issue. Number 1, though, number 1's response, though, is that it won't work, and that number 1 says that he loves Lizzie, not the computer. The computer's response is the "if I can't have you, no one can" response. So the computer grabs number 1 and Lizzie and prepares to self-destruct. Lizzie is angry with Number One, saying that this is now the worst day of her life and this is the worst way to end it. Number One tries to assure Lizzie that he'll figure out a way to free them, but Lizzie tells Number One not to bother, and Lizzie says that the computer can have Number One. And then she starts to rant about her grievances about Number One. The computer, though, finds this baffling, that Lizzie would have such grievances with Number One, and this causes the computer to be distracted. While the computer is distracted, this allows Number One a chance to free himself, and he frees Lizzie too. So they're out of the clutches of the Treehouse controlled computer, the computer controlling the Treehouse, and then the Sector V Treehouse blows up, and the computer blows up too. Number one compliments Lizzie for the plan that she came up with. Number One believes that Lizzie's speech was an act in order to distract the computer so they could escape, and he compliments Lizzie for this idea. Lizzie, however, claims that her speech wasn't an act, but her sincere thoughts. She says that while kids need Number One to fight adult tyranny for them, she doesn't need Number One in her life anymore, and she says goodbye to Number One before leaving. Number One, though, is surprised by this, and he tries to plead with Lizzie to return and how he can change. Shortly after Lizzie leaves, though, Number 362 arrives, and she says that she got here quickly so she could help Number One save Lizzie. But Number One clarifies for Number 362 that Lizzie has been saved, and Lizzie broke up with him. Number 362 can only respond in an awkward manner, her response is her acting a bit awkward after hearing this. In order to stop the awkwardness, Number One inquires if she was able to find number 65.3. She clarifies that yes, she was, but it turns out number 65.3 isn't a member of the Splinter Cell. He didn't return the sweater of sweetness to the First National Kids Candy Bank because he was actually trying to sneak it into the weight loss camp that his parents were sending him to. That's why he was at the airport. She figures that the weight loss camp must have very strict security or something along those lines at least. So after that though, number 362 invites number 1 to dinner on the moon base, saying that Meatball Sandwich Day is still occurring. Number 1 does appreciate number 362's offer, and he thanks her for the offer, but says that he thinks he will pass for this time. Number 362 does have a sad expression on her face, but she does assure number 1 that she understands, and she prepares to leave in her 2x4 technology vehicle. She also assures number 1 that he can always come talk to her if he needs to. He knows where to find her if he wants to talk. She bids number 1 farewell, and number 1 looks up at the night sky. When the treehouse exploded, fireworks were going on. Meanwhile, we see 2 shadowy figures are nearby, and they're watching number 1. These are the 2 same shadowy figures that were watching number 1 during Operation White House. They comment about how the computer performed its role in their plan very well, and they also say that number 1's connections have been severed, so they think number 1 is ready. And that is how we end this episode. Or no, actually, that's the main part of the episode. The actual end, the end credits scene shows, the end credits scene shows Lizzie's older sister and her husband at the airport. And Lizzie's older sister is furious with how number 1 ruined the wedding and the wedding reception. But her husband tries to assure her that there's no way he could ruin their honeymoon. But then a part of the Sector V treehouse, after the Sector V treehouse was destroyed, part of it fell on top of the plane that was going to take them to the location of their honeymoon. Number 65.3 is still at the airport. His flight didn't leave, apparently. And he figures, or yes, number 65.3 recognizes that part of the treehouse to be the treehouse that is Nigel Uno. Or yes, number 65.3 comments about how he recognizes that part of the treehouse to be part of Nigel Uno's treehouse. So yes, Lizzie's older sister becomes frustrated when she hears this. And that is how we end this episode. This is the actual end of the episode. So there you go. This was the 4th full episode of Season 6 of Codename Kids Next Door. And it continues from the events of Operation White House, but it also ties into the events of Operation Message and Operation Amish, because we now find out that these shadowy figures are apparently members of the Splinter Cell, although there is more to the Splinter Cell than what these entries so far have revealed. We'll cross those bridges when we eventually get to them, but for now, yes, we do find out that the shadowy figures from Operation White House that are testing number 1 are members of the Splinter Cell, and they are indeed interested in number 1, like number 362 suspected. And yes, we also do get a reference to, yes, Operation Message was when we first heard about the Splinter Cell being called the Splinter Cell in the message that Egbert Eggleston sent to Muffy Jenkins, warning her that the Splinter Cell is real. And then Operation Amish was actually brought up in this episode. And I did mention this in the recap and thoughts video for Operation Amish, but apparently, back when these entries first aired on TV, they actually aired out of order. Operation Girlfriend aired before Operation Science and Operation Amish, even though production order-wise, Operation Girlfriend is supposed to take place after Operation Science and Operation Amish, which is why I covered these entries in their production order. But yes, Operation Amish was when number 1 first revealed that he heard about the Splinter Cell and their extremist mindset. But at the end of Operation Amish, like number 1 brought up in this episode, it was just a cover story for the Kids Next Door scientists. But number 362 clarifies that even though the Kids Next Door scientists were using that cover story, there actually is a Splinter Cell in the organization. And yes, they're interested in number 1 for some reason. They want number 1 to join their cause. And you can be assured that this will be clarified in some later entries of the series. We'll cross those bridges when we eventually get to them. But otherwise, number 1's bond with Lizzie was one of the main focuses of this particular episode. This was actually the episode where, yes, Lizzie broke up with number 1. That's how this episode ended. And Tom Warburton did bring up some details about what went on with this episode on one of his blog posts. So according to one of his blog posts, Tom Warburton did acknowledge that Lizzie is a base-breaking character. There are some fans that really like Lizzie, and there are also some fans that really don't like Lizzie. And Tom Warburton, in this blog post, Tom Warburton did bring up about how he's heard some fans insisting that number 1 and Lizzie should break up, and he also heard some fans voicing their sentiments that they believe that number 1 and Lizzie should stay together. According to this same blog post, Tom Warburton said that he never really heard any fans vocalize the sentiments that Lizzie should break up with number 1. He also mentions in this same blog post that two of the staff or crew members suggested the idea of an entry where the computer fell in love with number 1. And so that was partially the inspiration for this particular episode. And yeah, I would have to say I was definitely surprised that the computer acted the way that it did during this episode. And the scene where the computer took over the Sector V treehouse and it was chasing after Number 1 and Lizzie, that was rather unnerving. And I think part of that is because of how the computer generated imagery, the CGI for the treehouse did feel unnatural. And that actually worked to its advantage. It actually made the scene more unsettling, I feel, having that CGI for the treehouse while it was chasing after Number 1. Yes, the CGI didn't really look like it blended in with the rest of the scenes and characters, but that was actually to its advantage. I feel it made the treehouse controlled computer that much more unnerving, or added to the nightmare fuel, so to speak. So yeah, that definitely stood out to me. That was definitely a surprise to me. And although the computer claimed that it acted of its own free will, we do find out that this was actually a plan of the Splinter Cell, like Number 1 had suspected. And yes, while we're on the topic about being part of the Splinter Cell's plans, we should also talk about with Lizzie. Yes, throughout the course of these recap and thoughts videos, I have mentioned that after the series ended, a few years after the series ended, a certain detail about Lizzie was revealed, Lizzie's true identity. This was revealed in the preview or the teaser that was hoping to promote interest in the sequel or spin-off series for Codename Kids Next Door. So far, as of the recording of this video, the sequel or spin-off series hasn't been greenlit yet, but fans are still keeping their fingers crossed that it will see the light of day eventually. But yes, this preview did reveal some important things about Lizzie, or this teaser had revealed some important details about Lizzie. For the sake of this recap and thoughts video, I will at least mention this detail, but Lizzie's true identity does reveal that she actually is affiliated with the Splinter Cell. So yes, even though Lizzie claims that she wasn't putting on an act and that she meant what she said to Number 1, Lizzie actually was putting on an act. Yes, Lizzie actually was putting on an act, but not in the way that Number 1 thought. So one could say that Number 1 was right for the wrong reasons about Lizzie putting on an act. But yes, Lizzie is affiliated with the Splinter Cell, or the shadowy figures. And yes, that definitely puts a different perspective on Lizzie's character. A lot of fans have definitely questioned if Lizzie really genuinely cared about Number 1 or not. Some fans wondered this gives the impression that Lizzie didn't actually care about Number 1, or at least maybe not initially. Some fans have considered the possibility of Lizzie becoming the Mask. Like maybe she did grow to care about Number 1 while acting on behalf of the Splinter Cell, or part of her mission as a member of the Splinter Cell. Although she still had to go through with it because the Splinter Cell clearly had plans for Number 1. So that's led to an interesting debate for some fans. Like, did Lizzie truly care about Number 1 at all, or did Lizzie eventually grow to care about Number 1 while putting on an act for her mission as part of the Splinter Cell? So that's been an interesting debate that some fans have had. Now, the other big detail about this episode, we do get to see, none of the other Sector V operatives besides Number 1 appear in this episode, but we do get to meet, we do get to see some other important non-Sector V operatives like Number 65.3 and Number 362. We do get a red herring where we're led to believe that Number 65.3 could be a member of the Splinter Cell, but he actually isn't. He just wanted to get some candy into the weight loss camp that he was being sent to. And we do get to see some interactions with Number 362. Number 362 warns Number 1 about how any other operative within the organization could be a member of the Splinter Cell, and warns Number 1 to be careful. And Number 1 and Number 362's interactions in this episode were a highlight for many fans, and myself included. Yes, I brought up before how one of the more popular pairings among fans is the number 1 and number 362 pairing. Courting Commanders, that's what fans call it. The Courting Commanders pairing is what some fans call the pairing between Nigel Uno and Rachel McKenzie, aka number 1 and number 362. And yes, Operation It was the first episode that really kind of gave the majority of fans the idea of the pairing, or at least led to most fans figuring, yeah, that actually sounds like a cool pairing. Although I wouldn't be surprised if maybe some fans have thought about the pairing before Operation It aired, but Operation It was where most fans started to consider the pairing, and Operation Zero, the TV movie, also added some sentiments to the pairing, or added some fans to the pairing. Operation Girlfriend, this episode, Operation Girlfriend, all but outright states that Rachel carries a torch for Nigel. So this is definitely what led to a lot of fans really considering the Courting Commanders pairing to happen. And I might as well bring it up now, but unfortunately the Courting Commanders pairing doesn't occur by the end of the series. Now, maybe the sequel series or the spin-off series could lead to the Courting Commanders pairing occurring, but like I said, as of the recording of this video, the Courting Commanders pairing, or the sequel series or the spin-off series, hasn't been greenlit yet as of the recording of this video. So we'll just have to be patient and see if the sequel series or spin-off series does get greenlit in the future. I'm certainly hoping that it does. And maybe the sequel series can give the Courting Commanders pairing a chance. Or maybe we can see the Courting Commanders pairing occur within the sequel series or the spin-off series. We'll just have to be patient and see what's going on. Oh, and while I'm talking about their interactions, yes, I did find that an interesting detail, how for most of the episode, yes, number 1 and number 362 were actually calling each other by their actual names, not their code names or designated numbers. But there were a few times, like number 1, when he was formally greeting number 362, he used her code name or designated number. And when number 362 was giving number 1 a direct order, she did use his code name or his designated number. And that was also an important detail too. While this episode all but outright states that number 362 carries a torch for number 1, or has feelings for number 1, that doesn't get in the way of her still putting her foot down when she feels that she needs to put her foot down, or when she feels number 1 needs to listen. So that's also an important detail, I felt. Yes, number 362 may have feelings for number 1, but she's not going to let them get in the way of what she thinks is important for the organization overall. So I did think that was an important detail worth covering. So otherwise, yes, so with this episode covered, there's actually 2 more episodes and 2 more TV specials for Codename Kids Next Door left to cover. The next episode is the last episode to be split between an A segment and a B segment, with the last episode being a full episode. And then one of the TV specials is a crossover with another series, and then the last TV special is the series finale. So we're getting closer to the end of Codename Kids Next Door, and you can expect more about the Splinter Cell saga to be explored within at least the last full episode and the TV series, or the TV special that is the series finale for the series. So we'll be sure to talk about those in greater detail. But for this episode, I did enjoy this episode. This might be one of my favorite... Yeah, this is one of my favorite Season 6 episodes, and I would consider this to be one of my favorite episodes in the series overall. Like I said, I did like seeing number 1 and number 362's interactions with each other. I do acknowledge I would consider myself a fan of the Courting Commanders pairing. That's not to say anything bad about Lizzie's character, and that's not to say anything bad about... Yeah, that's not to say anything bad about Lizzie. I just feel that number 1 has better chemistry with number 362. And yes, looking back on this episode with hindsight, or thanks to the details that were revealed after the series ended, with Lizzie's true identity being revealed and her affiliation with the Splinter Cell, it does put Lizzie's actions in this episode and her actions throughout the series overall in a different light. And some fans have definitely debated over if Lizzie really cared about number one, or if maybe she grew to care about number one over the course of the series, even though she was still trying to fulfill her mission. And otherwise, yes, the Splinter Cell mystery continues, and we know that the Splinter Cell wants to sever number one's ties for some reason, and this will be made more clear in time. But there we go for now. That was definitely on the longer side, but I do feel that there was a lot to cover for this particular episode. But we've discussed it now. So as of this video, we've now discussed episode 76 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel. Take care, and until next time.